So yesterday we took delivery of our PECKY CYPRESS millwork. There's a bunch of 1x stuff and some moldings that we had picked out. And in this basement right here behind me, we are going to install it. PECKY CYPRESS is a wood that has a natural decay, really interesting look to it. And we're gonna be using that wood to make a mantle. We're gonna make some beams and we're gonna make some wainscot. So let's go check this stuff out. We're excited to get started on this. Look at the look of this wood. It just has such a unique look. That board on top is a really extreme example, but that is PECKY CYPRESS right there. We are going to see this room completely transform, and that is the power of millwork. But to get started, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with that single step, and we're gonna take that single step right here, laying on our wainscot on this corner. So as you can see, I have the general idea laid out for this design on the wall, and right now I'm checking for level and it's good to go. So I'm gonna measure from the floor up to that level line to get my first stiles measured. So I'm gonna be building this in a unique way, you'll see as we go on here, but I've got this sketch laid out across the whole room and it's a general sketch. So we're gonna go ahead and cut our first piece here, and from the look of this PECKY CYPRESS, as you would imagine, it's a pretty fragile wood. So I've got to be careful with it. So once we've got these two stiles, I can set up the table saw for a 45-degree cut. And this one is to turn the corner on that little wraparound going into the next wall. And this one is for this left-hand side and just having it so I can scribe it. So now I'm going to measure the turn right there, go get that cut and do a dry fit on it. And with this dry fit, I'll be able to hold this in place, making sure it's good to go, making sure I like the way that that miter looks. And just take my pencil and mark down. This is where I'm gonna be measuring for my rails, which is the next component that I'm gonna be cutting for. So I'll do it on the left-hand side as well. And with that, I can span my tape across from those two lines I just made and make sure I'm good to go. And remember, on this one I got 40 inches exactly for both of those. So I'll cut two pieces to 40 inches exactly and take them to the castle machine and put pocket holes in them. Now this build is going to take hundreds of pocket holes. I'm talking about for the entire room, not just for this panel, of course. And I gotta be careful with these because given the nature of this wood, I gotta strategically place these. Like right there would not have been a good spot. It would have just hogged out that decay. So here I'm going to assemble these. You can see I've got a spacer elevating that bottom rail, and that's because this stuff is so expensive. I didn't want to just have PECKY CYPRESS behind baseboard just being wasted. That stack that I showed you guys in the beginning was $25,000. So that stack right there behind me is 25 grand, and that's not even labor. That's just the material itself. So with this assembly put together, I can get it dropped in here and check my outside corner, make sure we're still good to go there before I move on, and everything checks out. So you can see that bottom near the floor, that gap, how I elevated the bottom rail, that will get covered, like I was saying, by our base molding. So you can see there, it is now eliminated. So I can move on to the next component in the build, which is the small stile. So I'll cut those. Those are 12 inches exactly for this build, and those will also get pocket holed. So with these pocket holes, I can take them back to the workbench and get them assembled. And you'll notice on this, I'm not using any glue. I don't need to use glue. This is a rustic look. Obviously with the PECKY CYPRESS, I mean, they're really not gonna do anything to this. They're not gonna sand it and make it all smooth. It's a rough, rustic barn look. So having these things perfectly flush and glued is not really gonna be a big deal. So I'm pointing out here that now I can get these next three rails, those horizontal pieces that are gonna fill up the middle body of that panel. So I'm getting those measured, and then I can eventually put that top rail back on that I just set down. So I'll get all these pieces cut. It's gonna be 3 of those 1x5s. Yeah, 1x5s, they're 4.5 inches, but I'm gonna need to rip them to 4 inches, and 4 times 3 is 12, and that'll get us to the exact same height of that previous style that we just cut, that 1x6 one. I feel like I'm saying a lot of numbers, but hopefully you're following along. It's a pretty basic build, so these will get a ton of pocket holes cut in them as well. And I'm estimating probably over 1,000 pocket screws in this whole build going around the whole room by the end of it. So thankfully I got that calcium machine, because that would be a nightmare without it. So there's our panel, and then I'll get that thing cut to its final length. I did it oversized, obviously, because it's going to be easier to not worry about lining it up, you know, as I'm putting it together. And then I can put some more pocket holes in it, because these are going to grab into those small stiles. So with that, I can drop this thing in and get it in place, get it assembled, and screw it in. I know as I was building this thing, I was just like unsure of it at first. I'm like, I've never done a wainscot like this, or with a wood like this especially, but seeing this first panel go in, it really like changed my mind on the whole design. So here I'm obviously cutting out for that outlet and just double checking, triple checking stuff, because I do not want to rebuild this for cutting an outlet wrong. So I'll get that cut out of there and do my dry fit on that, making sure it's good to go and everything checks out. So I can go ahead and get my turn on here, that little miter wrap going into the wall there. So I'll put some glue on that and a bunch of miter spring clamps. And I absolutely love these things. I use them all the time. It's pretty crazy how much I use them now. I've been using these things for years. So I've got two routers set up here. That first one is a bead, but this one here is a cove cutting bit. So we're gonna make some cove base out of some of these 1x5s. So we'll get that bit started up, and it's a simple profile for a simple build. You can see I'm just putting a cove on this piece of wood. We're going to push that all the way through at a consistent feed rate, and we have now made our base molding. Pretty simple molding, nothing too crazy for this style. So here I'm going to go ahead and mark our studs, because now I can actually install my panel. The glue is dried up, I've took the clamps off, and look at that. It just brings me so much joy to see this kind of finished carpentry work go in. So I'm shooting into my studs with the 16 gauge nails. These are 2-inch nails, and it's going to give a real good bite on this thing. No construction adhesive behind this at all. There's no reason to. It's all screwed up as one. So big benefit to using pocket screws here. So I'll get my base in place that we just milled and mark these pieces out here. And I know it's going to be a 45-degree miter because I just made that outside corner. So again, using my spring clamps, and we can get this base installed. So here, you can see that profile. It just looks really sweet, just a real subtle cove there. And the next thing I can do is drop this other panel in. It's essentially the same exact process I showed you guys on that first one, but on a much smaller scale. And you'll notice there I have a piece of paint grade casing on my jamb. That will come off, and that will also be PECKY Cypress, but I don't want to stop doing the wainscot and start doing the casing, so I just grab an offcut of one of my paint grade casings to set my parameter for this panel and give me the dimensions. So we've got that in place. It's good, nice tight corner, no gaps there. And the next thing I can do is cope out my base, which I've done here. And I like to cope out my base, keep it long, and then measure off and get it cut in. So that's exactly what I did here, and it fit really well. So next thing we can do is make our apron. And for this, I'm using a beaded profile on that other router. And that way I just don't have to switch bits, because that's annoying when you're making so many different moldings, and you know, getting them set up the right way, it's just so much more efficient just to bring another router table with you. So our apron is going to be installed right at the top of our whole panel unit build, and that will be just set in place right there. Put some spacers block behind there, because I was like, you know what, I was holding it up and thinking, I don't want this to get pushed in or anything like that. I did it also on the base as well. I just forgot to record that part. Because I was thinking if someone hits it with a broom or something and it gets pushed in, or a mop, it's gonna be not good. So just giving myself some more anchor points, some blocking points to shoot into, and keep everything flush and on the same plane. Now the next piece of molding in this whole entire process is our cove molding. This one I did not have to make. I had the mill make this one for me. It is also in PECKY Cypress. You'll notice it's a little bit of a different color, and it's just because there's so many different colorations in this wood. As you can see, we've got dark, light, in between, extreme different ends of the spectrum as far as color. And most of my cove molding that was given to me was this lighter color, and I'm thinking they probably chose like a more solid piece, because as you can imagine, if you're milling this stuff, it can just fall apart on you, and such a small piece like this cove would have just crumbled, like literally just crumbled coming out of the mill. So they probably strategically selected this one for me, and it ended up being like a more lighter color for whatever reason. So there's a look at my cap, and there's a look from the top down at the build with my blocking in place, keeping everything on that same plane. So I'll go ahead and put some glue on my internal miter there, and just get that thing jammed in and shot. And I gotta say, I really like the way this came out. I'm not necessarily a fan of things that are rustic, but to me this is like beyond rustic. I feel like stuff that tries to look rustic and kind of old is generally, like, you can tell they're going for that look, but this one, the wood just does it itself, that it looks so organic that in my opinion it actually works. And this is again coming from someone who typically doesn't like stuff like this, that all I can describe is as rustic. So just looking at this profile here and the buildup of this, it's just so unique. And seeing this whole room go together is going to be on another level. I'm really looking forward to the mantle build of this as well, and the beams. The beams are going to be also pretty wild, seeing beams made out of this stuff. But yeah, I was able to get this one done. I got started on this long wall right here, got this thing screwed up, and that little piece in the corner, and then over here on this other is like a mirror image on the other side of the room. I'll show you this. It's pretty cool what happened over here. Here on this side, it looks so cool too. I mean, this PECKY stuff is just awesome. I know it's not for everyone, but I really, really like it. Well, I think this stuff actually comes from like the swamps of Louisiana or something. It's pretty wild. This is what happened over here. So I cut this long piece first to wrap around this corner. I was like, well, I've got all this, you know, big gash in this from the nature of the pecks and the cypress, if that's even what they're called. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just do a grain match, like a continuous grain match. And that's what I end up with. That is pretty cool how that looks. And it looks like it's a little open here. You can see that black line, but it's just the flakiness of this. I mean, some of this stuff is just so delicate. So you got to be careful with it. I learned today. I had a couple pieces that kind of just fell apart. So it's definitely an experience, but again, the overall look is spectacular in my humble opinion. So that is going to wrap it up for day one over here. They're digging a pretty deep ditch right here, or deep in my opinion. They're probably pulling water over here because I saw that goes up to the water source that I've been using. So I'm gonna jump over this, and dang, grasshoppers everywhere. But what they're doing out here is, in addition to the barn dominium, which is where I'm installing all that PECKY, and we did all the trimming here, but honestly it was pretty basic. That's why I didn't really share a whole lot of it. It was mostly like setting doors, pocket doors, and casing. But now that we're into that PECKY, it's cool. As if you couldn't tell, I'm pretty pumped about it. But this is going to be a lake house. They impounded this lake, built a bridge. I think it's like super deep over there. I'm really tempted to jump in right now because it is so hot here in Texas. Probably a lot of places. But yeah, we'll probably be doing the trim in this little lake house too. That'll be fun. And I think the plan for this one was that it was going to be cantilevered over the lake. I'm not sure if they're still going with that. You know, you would be on top of the lake. I see a bass right there. But this is a really cool project. I'm really thankful for the opportunity to do this kind of stuff. So yeah, hope you guys enjoy the journey. And I'll be sharing progress from this one as I go. So I'll catch you on the next one.